Good morning. I'm Mary Biggs, and I'm going to be your moderator today. And there's a couple of housekeeping things I want to start off with. Hopefully everyone has signed in because the evaluation is going to be sent to you through the internet, and you don't have to worry about filling out a paper evaluation. And the other thing is we have copies of the slide presentation on the back table that is going to be given today. I want to welcome you to our session today on securing the work environment. It's a hot topic of great concern to all of us as local and state leaders. And it's one that I'm pretty passionate about, and I'll tell you why. It started with a phone call from my middle school age niece in Littleton, Colorado on April 20th, 1999, the day of the Columbine shootings. And she said to me, "Aunt Mary, I shouldn't have to be worried about being shot at school." And I'm an elementary teacher, and I answered, "No, you shouldn't." Then, after that, we had the lockdown of the elementary school that I taught at in Blacksburg on April 16th, 2007, the day of the Virginia Tech tragedy. And now, the most recent incident at Virginia Beach, May 31st this year. We as leaders continue to be challenged in trying to provide safe and secure public places for our citizens. So the question is, how do we accomplish this while at the same time promoting an open atmosphere in our schools, our parks, and our government buildings? So hopefully today our panelists are going to be able to address some of this balancing act that we all face as leaders. So we have two really well-informed panelists today, and I'm going to introduce both of them to you, and then they're going to take their part of the program one at a time, and then we'll have questions. First, I want to start off with the Honorable Brian Moran, who is our Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Brian Moran was appointed by Governor McAuliffe in January 2014 and reappointed by Governor Northam in January 2018 as Virginia's Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security. The Office of the Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security comprises 11 state agencies and provides oversight to the Homeland Security and Resilience Staff Group. Secretary Moran served as Virginia's Chief Resilience Officer under Governor McAuliffe and currently serves as the Governor's Homeland Security Advisor and the Governor's Criminal Justice Advisor. And this is the next thing I think is really impressive as someone that works with police chiefs. In 2015, he was awarded the President's Award by the Virginia Association of Chiefs of Police. Prior to his appointment, Secretary Moran served as a longtime county prosecutor in Arlington, Virginia. In 1996, he was elected to the Virginia House of Delegates. That's when I ran into him, representing the 46th Legislative District, a seat that he held for 13 years. He championed and sponsored legislation in the areas of child abuse, domestic violence, drunk driving, drug interdiction, and elder abuse. He forged bipartisan coalitions to support and to pass numerous pieces of legislation. Most notably, he created the felony drunk driving law and Alicia's law, which provides law enforcement the necessary tools to stop internet sexual predators from preying on our children. So that's quite a bio, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for your service. And next, we have Ms. Donna Michaelis. She is the Director of the Virginia Center for School and Campus Safety. Ms. Michaelis is the Manager of the Virginia Center for School and Campus Safety and Public Safety Training at the Department of Criminal Justice Services. She has been working in the area of school safety since 1985, when she began her career with the Chesterfield County Police Department as the county's first child safety coordinator. Mrs. Michaelis assumed the responsibility of the newly legislated center at the Department of Criminal Justice Services when it was established in 2000 as a result of the Columbine tragedy. She is currently a manager within the Law Enforcement Division of DCJS, overseeing public safety training and the Virginia Center for School and Campus Safety. In her role, she provides training, resources, and technical assistance to all schools, colleges, and universities and law enforcement agencies across our Commonwealth on issues related to school and campus safety and specialized law enforcement issues. Ms. Michaelis is a graduate of the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. So we're going to start today, and we're going to lead off with Secretary Moran, and I think he has some comments that he would like to share with us.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much, Mary. It's nice to see you again. Thank you for your many years of service to Montgomery County. And great to be with Donna. You'll hear from Donna. She is a superstar at Department of Criminal Justice Services. She's been in this subject area for decades. Yeah, she started very young, but she's fabulous. So she's going to have a very nice presentation for you. And so let me just try to kick it off. And with this crowd, I know you're missing out on the budget. It's all about money next door. So we'll try to keep this interesting. I'd also welcome it to be more interactive. If you have questions, happy to try to respond and find out what's on your mind. I mean, when you talk about security of buildings, I mean, there's a variety of issues and places we could go with that. So, for instance, the fact that we had a historic election Tuesday will impact this subject matter. And so the governor gave a great update this morning. There's some other things within his agenda that you should be aware of, and happy to try to respond to any of those. For instance, some things that you're going to be, and we want to have you at the table as we discuss this. We've already, Chris and VACo have already come in. We've talked about body-worn cameras, for instance, and how do we fund them. Over 80 jurisdictions now deploy body-worn cameras. It's something we support Virginia State Police and others to use. And so that's a subject matter which you'll have to deal with. Decriminalization of marijuana. You heard this morning about Whitfield, the hemp plant. There's a big issue now around hemp, CBD oils, and marijuana, and about the THC level. One of the 11 agencies I oversee is the Department of Forensic Science. And right now the technology has not kept up with determining what's hemp and what's marijuana. The technology can't decipher how much THC there is. Being a former defense attorney, that actually opens up all sorts of defenses, but that is not my current role. So, but that is a big issue coming up. And again, with the new legislature, decriminalization will be a subject matter that we'll take up in January. And then guns. The governor has not shied away from trying to reduce gun violence in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and so that will be an issue come January. Actually, tomorrow we were anticipating a crime commission meeting because they have been studying the governor's bills with respect to curbing gun violence, and they have since canceled the crime commission meeting as a result of the election. And we also had a special session scheduled for November 18th, which also is being canceled because of the election. So things have changed. The board game has changed considerably. On guns, there are a couple of issues where well, it is a subject matter with respect to curbing gun safety in our buildings. One of which, with localities, one of the governor's bills is to give you all the authority to regulate firearms in your jurisdiction. As you well know, 15.2, 392. Well, anyway, 15.2 explicitly prohibits you from regulating firearms. There will be legislation to provide that authority to you. As someone who was in Charlottesville the weekend of August 12th, and the fact that individuals were carrying large capacity magazine firearms rifles and carry guns in that park during a demonstration where you had two groups that were protesting. The fact that Charlottesville could not prohibit firearms from that park really was, our estimation, kind of ludicrous. So that bill will be coming forward as well. So again, that's just throw all that out on the table. There's a lot to, there's going to be a lot of activity. And I guess for your purposes, we want VACo at the table. We really do encourage your interest, and your group will be. Your group has been great. And so, specifically with respect to this topic, securing our buildings, and as Mary has outlined it with respect to Virginia Tech and then Virginia Beach most recently, we've done some really good work, bipartisan work when it comes to school safety. We work with the Speaker of the House, Kirk Cox, members of the Republican legislature and Democrats. We really did some really good work. Donna will get into the specifics, but just some highlights. We doubled the amount of money available to you all to secure your schools. 6 million to 12 million, doubled that, so you can install the cameras and other physical assets to secure your buildings. And importantly, as we look into this issue, it's not just about the physical security, it's the emotional security. And so a lot of these kids need support services. And so the governor put money into the budget to address the school counselor ratio. The recommendation is 250 kids to one school counselor. We didn't achieve that, but we did invest $12 million in school counselors. And then third, Donna was really she was the School and Campus Safety Center at DCJS. She did all of the work, and so we recognized that and actually put money into the School and Campus Safety Center so that she can hire additional individuals so you can do additional trainings and model policies and adopt best practices and share them with you all. So we're really excited about the work Donna's going. So those are just the three of the highlights from school safety. I'm going to let Donna talk about the specifics. And then with respect to building security, we're doing a lot with our state buildings. Just for your knowledge of what we're trying to do is we're trying to adopt best practices, and there are a number of practices out there. I mean, Run, Hide, Fight, the ALICE program. I can't think of what ALICE stands for now, but and then there's CRACE, which is what we're using, Citizen Response to Active Shooter Events. And what they teach is avoid, defend, deny. Avoid, deny, defend. Similar to Run, Hide, Fight. And we have had, through DCJS, trainings, we've offered trainings for state employees on the Capitol grounds. I attended it. It's a 4-hour course. Talks about how to avoid and then deny using security on the doors and ultimately having to finish up. But it also includes some first aid in terms of stopping the bleed, learn how to use a tourniquet. Because in these active shooter events, frankly, we talk about first responders, law enforcement, which is heroic. I mean, they run in when everybody else is running out, they're fabulous. But frankly, it's all of us it's going to be your fellow employees who are the immediate responders. And even at Virginia Beach, the police department was across the street. It took them 3 minutes. 8 people had already been killed. So, as fast as they can arrive, they're not going to arrive in time. And so it is up to all of us. And so what we preach is a culture of preparedness. See something, say something. So that's how we are approaching this. And we're wonderful. We have Capitol Police. We probably have more resources than you do with respect to that. But those are some of the practices we are adopting. And then, as of October 1st, we've said, expect the check. Everyone gets checked heading into a state building now. You have to show the ID. We're reducing the number of entrances and access points. And so those are some of the more simple things we can do. Obviously, the card check system on the doors. And we're adopting all of those, or at least examining all of them for what works and what doesn't work. And so finally, let me just say, your state agencies are available for any assistance that you may need. Certainly DCJS, Donna's going to walk through all the various trainings that they provide, which are many. We provided money in last year's budget for an active shooter coordinator at DCJS, so that is available to you, that information and the training. VDIM, Department of Emergency Management, provides trainings as well. And then, of course, our Virginia State Police and the Fusion Center is available as well. They provide a tremendous amount of information sharing. So, lots to discuss. Happy to take any questions. And great talk. We appreciate you all being here. And with that, I think I'll just turn it over to Donna for her presentation. This presentation is about 3 hours long, but Donna talks very fast. So, Donna, all yours.
Thank you. For being born and bred in the South, you'd never know it. I talk really, really fast. I'm trying to keep up with the secretary. My name is Donna Michaelis, and I have the privilege of having the best job in state government. I love what I do, and I love talking about school safety, second only to bragging about my children. So, again, please forgive me my enthusiasm. I really do appreciate this opportunity. The secretary and I had the privilege of traversing the state last summer. I think we did about 18 presentations around school safety to let all the localities know what was available and how great Virginia is doing in this area. So I am going to brag throughout this presentation because Virginia is great on so many fronts when it comes to school safety. We are seen as a leader in the nation. Whenever you talk about school safety, I think it's really important to start with the facts, and that is schools are the safest place for your kids to be. I know it's hard to believe given the environment and the 24/7 news that we have in our face of every time something happens across the nation, but it's really important to know, and this is just one of hundreds of statistics that prove it out, that schools are the safest place. Kids are most likely to die at home, in restaurants, in the neighborhood, in car accidents than they are in the schools. You have a less than 3% chance of dying on school, and even that is on school property after school hours. And why is that? Because the most dedicated professionals, besides being law enforcement officers, are in our schools, where people are there to defend and protect your children. One of the things that Virginia that has to do with school safety is threat assessment. And so I'm going to quickly go through the building blocks of threat assessment in Virginia and why that's so important, and some of the statistics that we have that can prove to you what a great job schools are doing in protecting their students. One of the things that we always talk about is that parents, schools stand in loco parente, which is Latin for they stand in place of the parents. And so we try to run schools very much like you would run a home. You try to lock your doors, secure your perimeter, and keep the evil out. And we call that physical security. But also inside, we also need to make sure that we're doing our best to make sure we have the structure to protect our children. So while you're at home, you have code of conduct, so to speak, just like they do at schools. You have procedures and policies and things in place to make sure your kids are home on time, that they're doing their homework, that they're engaging in the proper activities. That's what we do at school as well. We try to make sure we have the proper structure, but we also have the proper support. And to do that, we call that an authoritative school, where you have high structure and high support. You want your kids to be engaged, and you want to make sure that you've done everything you can to keep the evil out. But sometimes, unfortunately, the problem is within. In order to have great school safety, in order to have a great school threat assessment program, we have 5 building blocks. And I'm going to focus in on a couple of these, but these are what we call the pillars of school safety: legislation, relationships, a strong school law enforcement partnership, good data, because you cannot possibly manage what you do not measure. And Virginia is great at that. And lastly, you've got to have a positive school climate. all very much things that you would do in your home. So first of all, legislation. I know all of you have heard the saying that Virginia is for lovers, and in my book, Virginia is for lovers, however, it's also for legislation. And I don't mean that kind of tongue-in-cheek. What I mean is, Virginia is great at putting laws on the books that put us ahead of the rest of the nation, and I'll explain that a little bit more. For example, they codified the Center for School Safety at the time in 2000. We were one of 27 centers for school safety that sprung up in the aftermath of Columbine. We are the longest running school safety center in the nation. We are the most successful school safety center in the nation. And the reason is they codified us, and ingeniously, they placed us at the Department of Criminal Justice Service. You might wonder, why did the General Assembly place the Center for School Safety at a Department of Criminal Justice Services? I can tell you at the time, because I was there to support the governor before some of the committees that were arguing about this, they wanted to put it in an institution of higher ed, they wanted to put it in the Department of Ed, they wanted it to be a standalone nonprofit. The reason that I think it's ingenious that they put it at the Department of Criminal Justice Services is that we're a nimble agency. We sit on the Capitol grounds, we report to the Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security. We're less than 140 people strong in our agency, which means we can get stuff done quickly. We're not that bureaucratic, we're lean, we're mean, and we have feet in both public safety and in schools. The other thing that made it ingenious is codifying all the things that we were supposed to do, and that is provide training to all school personnel, to serve as a resource and referral center, to collect school safety data, to disseminate best practices. And what I thought was the most ingenious of all is develop partnerships. And to make sure that the Center for School Safety developed partnerships, they didn't give it any money. They gave it $50,000 in one person, and basically in order to get anything done, you needed to make friends. And so we had to work with the other state agencies in order to deliver the message. When I worked in the local police department in Chesterfield County, my job was to provide school safety services to all middle and elementary schools, at the time in excess of 40 schools. And I was frustrated by the fact that anytime I needed something in state government, I had to go to a variety of different agencies. Department of Health for suicide information, Department of Education for other physical safety information, Department of Alcohol Beverage Control for drug and alcohol information. I needed, at the local level, a one-stop shop to get all of the great information that I needed from the state. And so that's why they set up the center the way they did, to become that focal point. That doesn't mean the center has all the answers. It means we have relationships with all the right people to get you the answers. So you can call the Center for School and Campus Safety, and we can reach out to our state partners, our federal partners, or other nonprofits and get what you need. Furthermore, as the years have gone on, the General Assembly has reacted and put more legislation in the Center's code, and that has required that we do more things. So, for example, in 2004, they transferred the need for doing school safety audits from the Department of Education to the Center, and put in a laundry list of things that we were to collect data on, as well as how we were supposed to do it electronically, and how we were to disseminate that information back to the localities. We have been putting out a school safety audit report for the state since 2005. We have one of the longest running data collection systems in the nation when it comes to K-12 schools. In 2004 and then again in 2006, the General Assembly was studying whether school security officers should have law enforcement powers. And one of the things that school security directors wanted was to be both stand in loco parente and also be a representative of law enforcement. They sent this to the Crime Commission and studied it, and when the Crime Commission came back, they said no. They said basically we need to have due process for our students. School security officers work at the discretion of school administrators, and they stand in loco parente. So therefore they can search lockers with reasonable suspicion. They can make sure they are enforcing the student code of conduct. What they can't do is search lockers under reasonable suspicion, find something criminal, turn their hat around, and then arrest your student. And what's very important is that we keep those processes distinct. And so in 2004 and then again in 2006, the General Assembly came back and said we need training standards for school security officers and campus security officers to make sure they understand their role and to make sure that they're doing anything in tandem with the law. So we are one of the first states in the nation to have security training standards and certification for both K-12 school security officers and higher ed campus security officers. And then you all know that in 2007 we had the tragedy at Virginia Tech. Again, the Virginia General Assembly quickly reacted and mandated threat assessment teams in higher education, making us the first state in the nation to have threat assessment teams mandated for public institutions of higher ed. The backstory on that, in case you didn't know, is that there was a lot of information about the perpetrator from various places. The problem was there was not a one-stop place where all that information fed into to help connect the dots. Everyone had a piece of the puzzle, and what happened was nobody put the puzzle together. So Virginia recognized that, and they adopted threat assessment teams. And we brought in Dr. Gene Dysinger from Iowa, and he became the Director of Threat Management Services at Virginia Tech and the department, the deputy chief there. And we began training with Dr. Dysinger, as well as many other national professionals, to provide threat assessment training to all institutions of public safety, our institutions of higher ed. You might wonder, why did the Center for School Safety do that? Well, back in 2006, when we were mandated to develop campus security officer certification, we got together all of the campus's chiefs of police from all public institutions in Virginia as our advisory council to find out what kind of training they needed. Because we had that advisory council, when threat assessment was established in 2008, and no state agency was designated to provide training or resources, it just told the institutions to go develop teams, they turned to us and said, will you help us? And so we, again, wrote grants, we received money and funding, and we brought in the best of the best from across the nation to train our institutions of public safety, higher ed, into how to do threat assessment training. So we dipped our toe in threat assessment, which is something that was foreign to a lot of people in this nation as well as the state. What does threat assessment have to do with securing our schools and our institutions of higher ed? Everything. Because as you'll see from our statistics, if a perpetrator is coming into your school or into your college or university, it's usually because they have a grievance against someone within that venue. It's very important to know who's among you, what their problems are, and engage with them. In 2013, in response to the tragedy at Sandy Hook, our General Assembly reacted by not only creating the School and Campus Safety Task Force that was established by the governor at the time, but by also coming up with 61 different recommendations to how to improve school safety here in Virginia. Again, this is a reaction to something that happened hundreds of miles away, but Virginia was right on top of it. And in 2013, there was a plethora of changes that came through both legislatively and also by executive action. Some of those were that they mandated K-12 threat assessment teams. We were then, and we still are, the only state in the nation that requires threat assessment teams in both K-12 and higher education. They mandated that we create a critical incident response curriculum for K-12 schools. This is basically based on the FBI's model of run, hide, fight. What they did not want is students cowering in a bathroom waiting as sitting ducks to be shot. They wanted teachers and staff to be aware that there are ways to get out. That sometimes running is the best option, sometimes defending is the best option, and sometimes, God forbid, you might actually have to throw something or hit something or push something in order to distract the shooter in order to protect your students and staff. They mandated emergency managers in each school division so that the school division had a point of contact with their local emergency manager so that they could connect and make sure that when the cavalry's coming, it's not the first time they've ever shaken hands and known who they're dealing with. Schools are not an island, they don't sit in isolation, and they're not trained on emergency response. They are there to protect and educate your students. We need to rely on the people that have the expertise, the ones that are going to be coming, to make sure they know where to come, when to come, how to come, and what the school should be doing while they're waiting for them to get there. They directed the Center for School and Campus Safety to develop model policies on threat assessment, and I can tell you that probably 50% of the other states in the nation have already copied our model threat assessment policies, just lifted them with abandon to make sure that they were doing what we were doing. So we've become a model in that area. And they've mandated more lockdown drills as well. Then in 2018, we call this the Year of School Safety, which is kind of an oxymoron given what precipitated it. In February of 2018, we all know that Parkland occurred down in Florida. And because of that, our General Assembly, our governor, and the federals turned around and created their own task force to study it. We had their first House Select Committee on School Safety since Abraham Lincoln was president. And that was an opportunity for the General Assembly to stand up a separate committee that wasn't already set up in legislature to discuss this important topic. The last important topic they discussed was secession from the Union. And so it's really important to show how Virginia took this seriously. They came out with 58 recommendations, many of which turned into law. The governor had a work group on student safety. I was privileged to be appointed to that work group, and we came up with 20 recommendations. And then the Federal Commission on School Safety, established at the White House, came up with 95 recommendations. I was also honored to be one of 6 people that went and presented to the Federal Commission on what Virginia was doing, because again, we are seen as a leader in the nation. Some of the legislation that resulted from those recommendations is House Bill 1737, where first responders and other specific groups are supposed to be included in crisis management planning. Prior to this, the legislation said, after you do your crisis plan, schools, you need to make sure you send it to the first responders so they know what they've got. Well, now it says they actually have to be at the table ahead of time, and that's integrally important. One of the questions that we used to ask on our safety audit is, do you number your outside doors? Again, we don't use our safety audit survey to gig school divisions. What we do is use it to push best practices. So at the time we started asking that question, about 56% of schools said, yeah, we put numbers on our outside doors, at least 12 inches tall. We finished asking that question 4 years later, and we had a 97% rate of schools numbering their outside doors. Why did they do that? Why did it increase? Because those who weren't answering yes started reading our survey and go, wait a minute, why are we one of the only school divisions that's not numbering our outside doors? Why do we need to? Because first responders do not know where Miss Miller's English class is. First responders need to know what door they need to go to neutralize the perpetrator. And so it's those types of things that are integrally important when you begin incorporating people and their expertise into protecting our schools. We have to develop a mandatory memorandum of understanding for schools and law enforcement to work together. Besides being passionate about school safety, I am passionate about defending law enforcement. I was born in a law enforcement agency, raised born in a law enforcement family, raised that way, married, took a job in law enforcement, married a law enforcement officer, and since then have been training law enforcement my entire life. These are some of the most stand-up people that you will ever meet in your life. As Secretary Moran said, they run to the fight when everyone else is running away. And I think it's absolutely integral that we use law enforcement as a partnership with schools in order to maintain that safety. People feel safer when there's law enforcement around, unless of course they're in your rearview mirror. Then not so much. But most of the time we feel safer that law enforcement is around. And so they asked us to develop a model memorandum of understanding on how schools and law enforcement should work together. And luckily we already had one. 2 years earlier we had developed one just because we knew Virginia needed one. They also mandate that SROs be trained and certified. Again, all SROs are certified law enforcement officers. And many of them, I'd say 85%, were already voluntarily going through DCJS's SRO training before they transitioned into schools. But they wanted to make sure, again, Virginia is a leader in the nation, and we are developing SRO training and certification standards so that before they enter your school, you know that they have actually had extra training about how to deal with juveniles. Another piece of legislation is House Bill 2609 and Senate Bill 1130 that mandates that at least one school administrator be trained in school safety. We can't just train one half of the partnership. We can't just train school resource officers on what school law looks like and how to deal with juveniles without making sure administrators know what is the role of this person so that they're not being dragged into situations in which they do not belong and increasing an opportunity for negative interaction with students. House Bill 1734 mandates that Virginia become the first in the nation to develop a threat assessment case management tool, which would allow schools to actually record and track the interventions that they have with each individual that whose behavior is posing a threat of harm to themselves or others. I'll get into that in just a minute. And lastly, they mandated that we develop an information sharing guide between schools and law enforcement. I know a lot of you might have heard of the word FERPA, which is the Federal Educational Rights and Privacy Act. Many people hide behind that law and think that they cannot share information with law enforcement or other professionals because FERPA disallows it. That's actually not the truth, and FERPA has a great deal of exceptions, and many of them are guaranteed around health and safety, and that's why it's necessary to share information. So we are developing a Virginia-specific information sharing guide, and I can tell you there's a lot of people in this nation who are looking for us to put that out so that they can copy it. Relationships. You have to have relationships in order to have strong school safety. Again, to see something, say something, you actually have to know if the behavior that you're witnessing is out of character for that particular person. And we have relationships with everyone. And when I say everyone, I mean up the scale, across the scale, down the scale. We work directly with those on the front level working in schools. Law enforcement, we work with 2,200 administrators, 4,500 assistant school administrators, all the school superintendents. We deal with every law enforcement agency in the state and every chief of police. We deal with all 69 colleges and universities and the law enforcement agencies that serve them. And then, of course, we work across the board with all school personnel, including teachers and counselors. But we also work at the secretariat level. We make sure we're working with the Office of the Secretary of Education, Public Safety, Health and Human Services. We have relationships, and when I say relationships, we know people by name and have their personal cell phone numbers at the federal level in DHS and Secret Service and FBI and U.S. Department of Education, because we've been at this a long time, and they see Virginia as a leader. Just the other day, several months ago, our Secretary of Public Safety indicated that he would like Virginia to hold a National Threat Assessment Conference for educational institutions. And his words were, make it big, make it good, and fill the room. So we had 900 folks from 35 states and 3 countries last week in Richmond, in Virginia, to see what Virginia is doing about threat assessment for K-12 and higher ed. I needed to keep a job, but I also like making Mr. Secretary happy. But that came together because of our federal partners, because of our reach across the nation, where we've been doing so much good work in this area. The third building block is this strong school law enforcement partnership that I mentioned. Like I said, we've had SROs in Virginia since the mid-1980s. We've been funding them and training them at DCJS since the mid-90s. And they provide K-12 services to kindergarten through 12th grade. There's 1,956 schools in Virginia across 132 school divisions. We have a saturation rate of 86% SROs in middle and high. That means 86% of our middle and high schools have an SRO full-time dedicated to it. 34 of our elementary schools have SROs. And as I mentioned earlier, prior to the legislation mandating that we create standards for SROs, we already had 85% of them voluntarily coming to our training. It shows you the caliber of person that's coming into our schools. They want to know, what is adolescent brain development? What's normal for a 12-year-old behavior, if there is such a thing? What do I need to do to intervene in de-escalate situations? What do I see in front of me? Is what's being seen a manifestation of some disability? Because we do training on that as well. And then, of course, we educate them in school law. SROs are a vital link between schools and community. Schools have kids for 6.5 hours. Who else deals with them the rest of the day? Law enforcement is the one responding to the school. Law enforcement has vital information about what is going on with that child that the school may not know. If the child is at school threatening to harm themselves, what might the law enforcement add to that? They might know that, hey, there's a meth house going on in their thing. That might be triggering them. Or we just arrested the father for domestic abuse. Maybe that's triggering them. They have valuable information that can help inform the schools about what interventions they could put in place. They're intimately familiar with the emergency custody order and child protective services. They can leverage other resources in the county or city that the schools may not. We create a lot of resources to support them. We have a model MOU. We also have a guide, school law enforcement partnership guide that shows schools and law enforcement, how do you roll this out? How do you make it work, still make sure there's due process, and do everything possible to keep kids safe? The fourth building block is data collection. As I mentioned earlier, you can't manage something you don't measure. And so we do a great job in Virginia of measuring. The school safety audit process is designed to collect, analyze, and disseminate school safety data, and to collect quantified data on threat assessment. We do that through a 5-pronged process. We do an annual survey of principals. We do an annual survey of division superintendents. We mandate that crisis plans be certified to us, that they've been to the school board for review, along with recommendations for physical, structural, and student engagement changes. We mandate a school climate survey that happens every other year and gives schools, individual schools, a climate report on what their school climate is from their students' perspective and from their staff perspective. Then it compares their data to the region and to the state. What a great way to put your pulse on what's going on. Because as Mr. Secretary alluded to earlier, perception and reality are the same thing. Your schools can be fortresses, but if your students and staff don't feel safe, it's not going to be safe. And lastly, they have to do a physical safety inspection checklist and certify to us that they've done that. Real quickly, I want to run through some of our threat assessment data, which is of national interest. Out of 1,563 schools that reported having a threat, that's 80% of our schools reported at least one or more threat. In 17-18, we had 14,869 threats assessed. What does that mean? That means a group of individuals, a principal, a law enforcement officer, a counselor, and someone in a teacher or instruction came together because they were concerned that Mr. Secretary's behavior is a little not right. And so they brought the people together and they assessed that threat. What did happen there? Did the kid get kicked out? Did they get arrested? I'll get to that. In 18-19 school year, we had 1,539 schools, 78% of the schools reported conducting one or more threat assessment, and now the total is 16,573. Does that mean our schools are less safe now than they were last year? Absolutely not. And I know you can't see this here, but on your handout, we started collecting this data before we were ever told to or before threat assessments were ever mandated. So in 2004, we began with like 3,500 threats that were being assessed. All the way up to where the mandate started in 2013, we had about 5,000 threats assessed. And as you can see, the threats being assessed go up every year. Again, the caveat to this is schools are more dangerous now. It means your personnel are doing a better job of looking, watching, observing, coming together and intervene before your child is on a pathway of violence. Threat assessment is not a gotcha. Threat assessment is prevention at its very core. That is why we have a U.S. Secret Service, because they are supposed to identify people who may pose a danger of threats. And as you can see here, this is what I was talking about earlier, 98% of the threats are coming from current students. 98%. The type of threat, and this is what's most disturbing. Every year, the threats against self has risen from 42% in 2015 to now 62%. The biggest harm we have, the biggest threat, is that students want to hurt themselves. We also, as you can see, the threats against others only has gone from 52% down to 34%, because students are less likely to want to hurt others if you're helping them from hurting themselves. And the threats against both has remained kind of steady, whether they wanted to hurt themselves and others. Again, when I started this work, suicide was the 6th leading cause of death among students. Today, as it is second. We asked about all threats and those that were averted and those were not. Very quickly, the summary is this. Threat assessment is the most successful program we have instituted. 99.7% of all threats assessed are averted. I'll say that again. 99.7% of all threats are averted. That means whatever the child was threatening, either through their behavior or through articulated or however it came out, it's averted because of the threat assessment team getting together and putting a safety plan together and supports in place so that they did not commit the act. 38 cases did occur, and that's less than 0.03% of all the threats that were occurred. And a lot of that time we think that this is a misunderstanding. We think that schools are reporting to us incidents that occurred, then they did a threat assessment. That's not really how it goes. So a fight broke out in the cafeteria, and then they broke it up, had a threat assessment to see if there was an ongoing issue. So we're trying to get at the bottom of what this actually means. But again, if you go back to our original numbers, 99.7% is an excellent response rate. And lastly, the positive school climate. You have to have an environment where people feel comfortable reporting, that they're not going to be labeled, and that what they report is not going to come back against them. We knew this was going to be a problem, so we created a marketing campaign called Virginia Cares, which stands for Caring and Connection, Awareness, Recognition, Engagement, and Support, because that's what threat assessment is. It's knowing what your kid's normal behavior is, it's intervening, it's giving them the support they need, it's creating a relationship so that other students who recognize things come forward and tell a trusted adult. And then just results from some climate surveys across the state, our aggregate is 79% of our students feel safe in the school. Knowing what the facts say, looking at our aggregate report and knowing that our teachers and our staff and our students feel safe in schools is really important. Do they feel like the school rules are equitably distributed? Do they feel like they're proud to be at the school? And most importantly, the research says it takes one positive adult to change the trajectory of a student's life. So we asked the question, do you feel like there's at least one person here who cares whether you succeed or not? And you can see the answers. We also asked the staff questions. And then we give them, as I said, a report that compares each question to the state average, the region, and the school itself. And we do a lot of training and resources, and I don't have time to go into this. Basically, if it involves school safety, we've developed a publication or resource or video. And we do a plethora of training throughout the year, and thanks to the General Assembly funds, we now can offer direct services to school divisions. Rather than us just putting out training across the state wherever we want, school divisions can specifically request training of us from literally dozens and dozens of topics that we have available, and we can come to you and bring the professionals straight to you. And we do a whole bunch of conferences. Now we have an annual threat assessment conference, thanks to Mr. Secretary. And then, of course, we have future plans to, of course, broaden this and make it bigger with the new funding that we've received. Thank you.
We're going to give Donna a chance to have some water after all that. Tonight, she can, great presentation. I could follow up on a couple of things that Donna had to say. On the school climate survey, we do read it. As you can tell, Donna reads it, and so I would have you all encourage your educators to fill it out and send that back and respond, because we do use it for policy determination and policy making, so that is a really useful document. SROs, we did increase funding for school resource officers, and of course that we also require an MOU now, so that we know what school, there's an understanding between the SRO and the education community and the school, what is school discipline versus what is criminal conduct, and when the SRO intervenes. And also, the Virginia Tech study that was done, the report that was conducted after the Virginia Tech tragedy, we actually went back. The governor called a special session. The Roanoke Times wrote an editorial saying, hey, why don't we go back and look at what the recommendations from the Virginia Tech study were, and why don't we implement those first before you do anything new? Well, Secretary Kerry and I went ahead and reviewed all of those recommendations with the help of DCGS and VDH and VDHDS and all these other state agencies. No, we actually implemented 70 out of 72 of their recommendations. The one that was not recommended, one was Chief of Police should be on the threat assessment team. Law enforcement is on a threat assessment team, so really we performed it, but being conservative, we just said fine, we didn't implement it. The other one was mandatory background checks they recommended, was never implemented. I suspect that might be come July, January. So Virginia Tech, the school counselors, the suicide, the threat to self. That's why we responded with, rather than more cameras and more secure, whiteboards, we went with school counselors, because they need to intervene. They need to be available for these kids who are suffering some sort of depression or health crisis. So that's why we put more money into school counselors. Good. Well, I think those are some of the, and I do want to congratulate Donna and her team. We did have the national conference. I did challenge them and say, we're the leader we're really proud of Virginia and the leadership we've exhibited with respect to threat assessment. Why don't we have a national conference? Why don't we share what we are doing here in the Commonwealth with the rest of our colleagues? And Donna and team pulled it off. We had over 800 attendees at Richmond. It was an enormous conference. The governor came and spoke, and it was a really three-day one. It was a tremendous conference, 35 states and 3 countries. So I really was very proud of Donna and her team. We were able to pull that off. And yeah, you've set a very high bar. I'm not sure what we do next year, but that was terrific. So yeah, but Mary, thanks. I just wanted to follow up on some of that information.
We'll open up for questions.
Mary, Mr. Secretary, being a former teacher and principal, I know schools are the utmost importance when it comes to safety. But now I'm a county official. We've got a big county complex that's very open. In light of the inside shooting at Virginia Beach, what are going to be the suggestions for those types of situations? I understand Virginia Beach, the police even had trouble moving from office to office because they did not have access to the doors.
First, it's appropriate for you all to examine what the practices are. We are still waiting for the after-action review from Virginia Beach to learn lessons. And every one of these tragedies, like Tech, we do an after-action review and try to learn from the incident. But as I said earlier, in the Virginia Beach, the police were there almost immediately. Yet, there were several deaths. And so, in the immediate response, and with respect to the state, what we're doing in the same buildings, with the state, we can prohibit firearms in state buildings. We have Capitol Police to monitor that. I don't know what is going to happen in your jurisdiction, Fred, with respect to limiting firearms or not. And, the Commonwealth has 136 very distinct jurisdictions. But from a state perspective, I think what the governor's going to do is you're going to have the authority. Whether you choose to exercise it or not is going to be your choice. But with respect to the state, we're prohibiting firearms, and you got to take a look at best practices. And Donna and the state police and the FBI will have some materials with respect to the technology. There's a lot of vendors out there who will have some wonderful products, and you've got to figure out what's best with respect to the key readers and what floors have access to the public and so forth. You want public. They pay for the buildings. They pay our salaries, and you want them to have access. We have DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles. Not everybody is pleased when they come or leave the DMV. So that is a great concern of ours. And so we're I think bottom line, examine it, get it on the table, at least and bring in all the stakeholders to have the conversation around what are the best security measures. But I would recommend first the immediate responders and employees. Whether you adopt a trace or run, hide, fight. There's a variety of methods, and you should explore each and every one of them that's best for your community.
Mr. Secretary, I collect their taxes, I'm DMV, and I'm a passport agent, so I'm fine.
Popular solid in your jurisdiction.
Thank you so much, and I think your approach is great about, businesses, people, all that, but I find where we are, somehow best practices, and believe it or not, I'm going to check some people in a number of new schools, and I just found out one of the doors don't close. So we got to retrofit the lines, and I think, what are we doing building schools in this day and age without this in the north? Why aren't we doing that? So I think there's some best practices that need to get kind of pushed out. I also find out that I'm the one who does security, and I've been worried about this for years. Nobody else wants to think about it. So I find that a lot on our door where you just have to do a little nothing big at all. I still have a college who's angry at me for it. Because it's just, why would you do it? Like with no security at all. And there's a problem with me kind of wanting it. So part of what I'm looking for is some support. Because I think if people don't know anything about it, and if they don't hear it from somebody else, and they just hear it from me, I'm not very persuasive. What do I am? I'm not a professional. I'm she thinks she is. Yeah, she just very. And I like to suggest if you think you need to move forward, so check this on facilities. The guns, absolutely, these guns that can kill like these people. But if we could encourage, I think, tabletops, because I try to get things with my colleagues, and if they would just sit and think it through, just a little bit, I think they get a little bit to where I am, but that's not happening, and I keep working on it. So any support you can provide on that, and helping, I think, particularly elected officials thinking about stuff they don't want to think about.
Well, I empathize with you. I understand the struggle that you've got. First of all, I have been invited to go to DHS on Sunday and Monday, Tuesday of next week to participate in them creating tabletop scenarios for schools. Obviously, full-scale drills are hugely expensive. Oftentimes, they traumatize students if they're trying to involve students in it. And so, one, we're putting out guidelines soon. We have a guide out now called Virginia Educator Skill Guide to Conducting Drills. We're getting ready to put out guidelines around active shooter drills and practices and what you should and shouldn't do and the performance of those so you don't traumatize kids. But the whole idea is you want to create an awareness. You want people to feel empowered that they have the ability to keep themselves safe. You cannot learn in an environment where you do not feel secure. For example, when I go to work, as he indicated, I know that there's doors to lock people out, that people can't come in and get to me. I know that there's Capitol Police in the building. People feel safe when they feel secure. Teachers can't teach if the latest school shooting is going through their head and they knew the person came in the back door. We have to be able to lock our doors. I also had the privilege of sitting on a subcommittee that was created by the General Assembly, Senate Bill 1755, wanted building officials and fire officials to get together to discuss how do we approach secondary or barricade devices for those schools that don't have the ability to lock the doors. My daughter is a second grade teacher, and when she started teaching, she was 21 years old in an at-risk school. I was terrified for her to not be able to lock her doors. And so one of the things, because she was in a far outreach where somebody could come in the back building door where they kept it propped open. So we discussed ways that she could secure her door in an emergency. And just that knowledge, you could push this over, you could do this, those different things makes her feel like I've got something to do to keep people from getting to my children. I think it's vitally important that you bring together building officials, fire officials, and you talk and bring in the law enforcement because they have crime prevention specialists in most law enforcement agencies. They can come in and do a survey of your schools or do a survey and say, what's the best way to make sure we're protecting our kids and using secondary devices to make sure they can lock the door and still teach in a practical environment. But that outcome of Senate Bill 1755 is still kind of going through. We did make recommendations on secondary devices and I can tell you, it was contentious. My goodness, it was contentious between fire and building officials and who has authority to tell who what. But what it comes down to is until every door in Virginia school can be locked and law enforcement can gain access when necessary and we can keep the bad guys out, we need to find a way that's cost effective for teachers to be able to teach and have the peace of mind that they can protect their students.
That's great. I'll just go back to Mr. Secretary. So you did it for schools? Mr. Secretary, did you do it for us too?
Right. Similar approach though, with building and fire personnel at the same table in the tabletop exercise, which we would like to be able to provide some assistance. Of course, Arlington likes to they do their own thing sometimes.
Yeah, but not always when they need to. That's just what he said.
No, you're expressing an opinion that is shared by many, so yeah. That's what we're working for.
On the subject bullying.
I'm sorry, I have a hard time hearing.
Bullying in schools, social media, younger and younger children have cell phones now. Are you all doing studies, research, anything like that?
Yes, so one of the things that the General Assembly has been looking at is the implementation of anonymous reporting Mobile School Safety Act. In fact, that report is due to the General Assembly December 1, so the Secretary will have it on his desk Monday, I hope, from us. And in it, we make recommendations about if we're going to look at a mobile school safety reporting app, what does that look like? How much does it cost? Will it affect our threat assessment? Will it cause more harm or injury to our students and our staff? One thing we have to remember is that teachers and school administrators are in the business of teaching, to ask them to monitor social media and everything that comes across it, they required 3 times the staff that they currently have. A lot of the algorithms and systems out there that report things often pick up on things like the word shoot when I'm going to shoot hoops after school. So there's a lot of false reporting, a lot of things that go against what we teach, which is build a relationship. Make your staff get out and know kids so that when they see a change in behavior, they feel confident to engage with that student, report it to the threat assessment teams, bring people together to see, bring the cavalry together to say, okay, what's going on with this kid? What can we do? What information don't we have? Let's engage the parents. So I think it's really important that that school administrators have a pulse of what's going on, but what's more important is you have schools with 3,500 kids. They know what's going on. They are going to always know way more than the school staff. So what you want to do is have an environment, have a positive school climate where everybody wants to protect the environment and somebody will report it, because you will never be able to catch everything on social media. Relationships are the way to go, and creating an environment where everyone has a stake in school safety and everyone knows that if this behavior is going on, or I've noticed a change, or they've leaked something here or there. Because and we do this a lot, we debrief every school shooting that's ever occurred. We bring the parents who have lost children, the principals of Columbine, the victims of Virginia Tech. We bring them and have them debrief the incident for our constituency. And every time there's leakage, every time people knew something and didn't tell. And that's the environment that we have to overcome now. That's the culture we have to overcome. We have to make our schools understand, the kids understand, this is you and your friends. This is your environment. You have a responsibility to protect it. Even if it's something that's not propping the door open, but also reporting things, because we have to have the relationships where kids know that administrator is not just going to put that kid out of school, because that's not how you deal with school safety. We engage with that student, provide protection and supports, because the moment that you suspend or expel that kid, you've now lost your eyes and your ability to protect the school because they're disassociated and who knows what's going on. That's where the problem is. And so creating that environment where they have a positive school climate. So I'm not saying that bullying's not a problem, but it's part of that positive school climate where people begin to police each other and have the thing to say, that's not the right way to behave. You're not doing that. And they feel a sense of community and camaraderie with their other students.
Everything we're doing is with public sector. My county has quite a few private schools. And are we ever going to get to the point where we have a marriage between private and public sector? Because what gets reported is from the public sector. But the private sector seems to want to hold it in. My congregation that I belong to, our bishop has mandated that we have armed security teams at every function. So there's an armed member in our trustees. There's an armed member with our breakfast club. It carries across. There's never a service without a minimum of 8. And we carry greeter badges of different colors. So the congregation knows we're security team. We have an ex-chief of police, retired chief of police from Front Royal. Gordon has helped put together our program. And we went in and did some restructuring in the building. We automatically lock doors, pregnancy after service. But we go out to ranges twice a year, and then we go through reenactments. And it's amazing. Most of us are ex-military. There's a few ex-police that are retired. Military, when there's a threat, you take it out. But you can't turn and shoot into a congregation, because you're going to take out more than just the individual. So there's a lot of training and retraining needed, but we need to merge the two to get true facts.
There's a lot there. The marriage between private and public, you want to address that one?
In the K-12 world, I can tell you that the Catholic Diocese, as well as many of the independent schools in Virginia, attend our training in mass. We do not discriminate. Anybody that wants to come can come, and we respond to them individually. When the Virginia Association of Independent Schools calls and wants to put on a conference, we bring our resources to bear there, bring in national experts. We also encourage the Catholic Diocese and all of the independent schools to attend our trainings. One of the things that happens in the independent schools is they have the ability to have armed security already. I mean, obviously they can do so. In public schools, you can have armed school security officers if they meet a criteria of being retired law enforcement, going through the firearms training, etc. So in the K-12 and higher ed world, we already merged that. We provide as many services to our independent and private colleges and universities and K-12 schools as we do to the public.
DOC employee, how are you, sir?
Yes, sir. Question, SRO certification training. What's the timeline on that?
The legislation gives us till July of 2020. As I said, we are, due to the monies that were given to us last year in the General Assembly, rather than doing 3 full week-long SRO trainings that gather about 80 SROs per training, next year we already have 10 of them on the books. So we'll be doing basically almost one a month, but we're congregating them around the summer months, so the vast majority of them are between March and October. And certification is due out in July. It depends on whether we're going to be required to do regulations or if we can simply go before the Criminal Justice Services Board with our standards. We have the standards ready because we are one of the only states in the nation that has their own SRO curriculum, and we've had that curriculum since 2015. So we already have a very robust 40-hour curriculum that we've been teaching since 2015.
I just thought, real quick, our police have been going to mosques and synagogues and offering to go on site and look at what's going on, and that both helps them and it gets this connection going. So we might.
We have 3 officers that run through the county that are members of the congregation. And we try to pick their brain besides the retired chief of police.
No, it's great. And they go on site, but with the congregation even to talk about it sometimes where you can go.
It's hard to get the congregation to talk about security.
Yeah, right.
They don't want to do it.
Yes.
It's frustrating.
We have 3 hands up. We want to be able to recognize in the next 5 minutes. We have here, so just go right across.
So if you could kind of talk a little bit more about the plans of the schools and not, I know one of the disconnects we have in our own county, schools spend $70,000+ on locks, and they found out later on we're not approved. Everybody probably heard about that. From Augusta, Isle of Wight. So we got that. But the other thing is, so it seems like our school board approves this plan that you guys alluded to, that the schools are supposed to be a part of. The school board approved it after the superintendent signed off on it, which is after the deadline. So I'd like to actually understand that process a little bit further. Maybe it's too much to get into here, but I know I've got one of our other board members here that there seems to be a disconnect at the school level, at least for us. If you want to get involved in making sure things are safe, they want you to leave them alone. So I'm just trying to understand it better because it is frustrating.
It's actually relatively simple. The school crisis plan has to be reviewed. Actually, we do the school safety security inspection checklist that's due every 3 years. We do the school safety audit, which is due in September 30th by every school, and the school division survey. And what they're supposed to do from that is make recommendations by December or January to the superintendent, each school. After they do their walkthrough, after they do the survey, they're supposed to make recommendations to their school superintendent. The school superintendent is supposed to include those in their crisis management planning. After they do so, they send it to the school board, which was an addition, a change in the law back in 2013, because school boards wanted to know what the superintendent was writing off on. They have to review it, and then the superintendent has to certify to the Department of Criminal Justice Services Center for School and Campus Safety by August 31st of each year. So what happens is, what happened just now, what went through August and September, the school will take that time to make recommendations on physical and behavioral changes that need to occur between now and the beginning of the year. The superintendent is supposed to use that to change their crisis plan for the coming year, make recommendations to the school board, and then certify to us that they've done so by August 31st. They do not send their recommendations to us. Again, that's an internal process within the school division. However, in the next school survey that we ask of divisions, we ask them if they made recommendations, and if so, what they were, so that I can report to the General Assembly and the Secretary what the major changes were amongst the school divisions.
About suicide, our county has had suicide within our school-age kids and then also the employees. How can we work to get more awareness and provide that additional counselors? But how can we help that we have a stigma that, someone they have a mental issue that we can do more to identify that and help them without labeling them? Because if you have an employee that you're concerned about and you're thinking something to speak up, how does that become something where they're not hurting their job, or if it's a student, what can they do? How can they do that in school and in the job?
So this is a national problem. Obviously, mental health has a stigma against it and has for a very long time. The more you talk about it, the more statistics that we can give people saying this isn't just you, but 62% of the threats we're assessing are about suicide. That tells you our kids are hurting. What we need to do is, one, make it easy for them to find assistance. We also need to stop keeping suicide assessment separate from threat assessment. We need to make sure all threats are coming to the threat assessment team, and then once it's determined that they have all the information they need, then the suicide assessment is handled through professional counselors that do so. I think folks think that when we bring them into the threat assessment team that they're going to, they're in a cloistered room and they're going to start and do more harm to the child. What they're trying to do is gather all the information to help the counselors deal with the suicide assessment and make sure they get the services they need. Yes, there's been a stigma around it. However, the more that we start pulling back the curtain, one of the things that we're dealing with now is law enforcement suicides, where we've just started doing impact of trauma on law enforcement officers. The suicide rate among law enforcement officers is twice the national average. That tells us that there's a stigma between taking off your cape and realizing you can't handle everything. And that you're human. And so we're trying to work on that front as well as on the school front. And again, you do that through a positive school climate, saying everybody hurts, everybody goes through stuff, and there's a way to get back to being healthy again.
That's such a big issue. I mean, the intersection of mental health and public safety, we've been working with 6 years that I've been secretary. I mean, your local sheriff will tell you half of his inmate population has some mental health issues. So, huge issue. Community service boards. I mean, we're working with our counterparts in health. Over 600 of our gun deaths are 1,056, and well over 600. I think 680 of them are suicide. So, big issue. The school environment, which Donna's addressed, but it's we could spend a lot of time on that. But you now, as an elected official, you bring attention to it and addressing it, eliminating that stigma. So, big issue. Yep.
Thank you all for coming to present to us. So I was a little torn between going next door to the budget meeting or coming in here. So every time I hear about legislation, I see money coming out of my budget through my local contributions. So with grants, we've been relying on those a lot in King George County. They come with strings, and sometimes, after 3 years, now you have to bring on these positions and pay for them out of your budget. Our SAFER grant just expired, so that's hitting my budget next year. But with our sheriff's departments, we now have SROs in all of our county schools, but we have to pay for that. So what I'm asking you, not really a question, but more of a request, we need someone or engagement with the compensation board. With the number of deputies that we're allocating in King George, we're actually having to pay a lot through local contributions to offset my sheriff's office. And every time a new requirement comes out through legislation, that's more and more money that is impacting us through local contributions. So I would appreciate that.
That's a good way to wrap up. But unfunded mandates, we oppose unfunded mandates. Is that a popular opinion in this room? I will say what we've done around school resource officers. When we did the 18 listening sessions, it became apparent we all had to pony up money. King George, Isle of Wight, they may not have the resources. And so instead of cash match, we said in-kind match. So you don't have to put up, if you're hiring, 50% of their salary, you don't have to come out of your budget balance. It's in-kind services, so that could be training or other things that you're already doing and that you can use to match. So we heard you, and we tried to respond to that, and we'll continue as we proceed ahead around funding. I will say, the state feels you're paying too. Our Department of Emergency Management, 80% of Department of Emergency Management's budget, federal grants, it's federal money. And we always go back to the legislature and say, we're dealing with sea level rise, we're dealing with more hurricanes, tornadoes in the Commonwealth are more frequent. We've got all these issues, dam, maintenance. And so we say, you need to come up with more general funding. But right now, it's 80% is from grants. So just, I commiserate with you. How's that sound? But we're opposed to unfunded, and as we pass, we propose, the legislature disposes. We're very much aware that we did increase for school counselors, and we did increase funding for SROs. We certainly are very mindful of your budget restraints as well. And, the promise from the administration, we will keep that in mind as we proceed ahead. How's that? The way to complete it, Mary?
Excellent. It's always about money on the local level. You know that. That's been counted into you. So I want to give a round